Hi, this is Grandma here, and I'm reading The House of 60 Fathers, and I'm going to begin chapter 5, and it's called Cuckoos Call at Night. And we have a photo here of a cuckoo. To review what happened in the previous chapter, Tien Pao has met up with the airman that he had helped across the river with the sampan. This is the same airman that crashed his airplane. And Tien Pao has found that the airman is injured. So they've got a big problem. Should Tien Pao go on and try to find help? Should he stay with the airman, or should he try to get the airman to walk to safety? Cuckoos call at night. They must go on. As soon as it was night, they must go on. Wounded and sick and feverish as the American was, somehow he had to walk. It was not safe to stay in the same place too long. With a stiff grimace, the airman agreed. They had held a conference, Tien Pao and the American, a conference without words, and they had agreed that in spite of the wound in the awful swollen black leg, they would have to move on. At the very least, he would have to limp to another hiding place, but if at all possible, they would walk all night. Perhaps it would be better to rest the leg another day and night, but it was impossible to tell. The wound might become so bad that the airman would not be able to move at all, and they had to move. If the Japanese were still searching, it wasn't safe to stay in one place. Sooner or later, they'd find it. When the gathering shadows lay long down the mountains, Tien Pao got ready to leave the cave to find water. The airman needed water. He was burning up, his lips were cracking. When toward evening the man briefly roused from his tossing, restless sleep, Tien Pao picked up the leather helmet to indicate to him that he was going after water. The airman ran his hot tongue over his cracked lips and nodded eagerly. He looked greedily at the flat, dangling helmet, but he also looked anxious, and he tried to make Tien Pao understand that he must be very careful. Tien Pao knotted the rope around Gloria the Republic's leg. He made the man hold the other end of the rope. He did it because Gloria the Republic would be sure to set up a struggle to follow him, and that would keep the airman awake. The airman had to stay awake, for in his sleep he talked loud and long in his foreign tongue. Just one word of that foreign language would be a dead giveaway to anyone who heard it. Tien Pao closed the airman's fingers around Gloria the Republic's snout so the little pig couldn't squeal. Then he left. Outside, he listened long. Then he carefully built up the screen of leaves again into a natural-looking heap. It wasn't quite dark, but Tien Pao kept to the shadows of the rocks and brush. He did not dare go down to the river, and the only other place he knew to go for water was a little wet cave in the cliff in which he had hidden. When Tien Pao at last reached the little cave, he saw at once that it had been disturbed. The Japanese had searched it. Tien Pao crawled in, but while he sat crouched in the little hole, waiting for the slow trickle to fill the leather helmet, he suddenly heard voices. He sat still as death, not daring to move, not even daring to breathe. 2 Japanese soldiers marched past the cave. They did not stop. They did not stoop to look in. These men must have been the ones who had searched the cave earlier. They passed on. Their footsteps faded. Long after the helmet had filled, Tien Pao still waited. He drank his fill, and then he let the trickle slowly fill the helmet again. It gave him something to do, and he had to force himself to wait. It was almost impossible in his desperate anxiety. The airman might have gone to sleep in the long wait and talked out in his strange voice. Gloria the Republic might have struggled and squealed and broken away. They didn't know that the Japanese were still in these mountains. The larger convoy might have gone on, but a detachment must have been left behind to comb all the area. At last it was dark enough so that Tien Pao dared venture out of the little cave. He did not dare use the path. He crept along, guarding the precious water and searching out the best possible path among the rocks on the thorn-tight cliffs. He mustn't stumble. Near their hideout, Tien Pao sat long in the deep shadows, watching and listening. He was rewarded. A second searching party passed below. Just beyond the square cliff, or the squat cliff, where Tien Pao sat, he saw the second searching party join the two men who had passed the little watery cave. They marched off together, and Tien Pao guessed that the search might have been called off for the night. The anxious airman was sitting bolt upright behind the wall of leaves. He had Glory of the Republic clenched in his arms. His face broke into a big, relieved grin when he saw Tien Pao worming through the leaves. He grabbed the helmet. He emptied it in gulps. But while the airman drank, Tien Pao had news, bad news. He made believe he was holding a rifle to show that he was telling about the Japanese. He ducked his head and poked it toward every cranny in the crevice to show the Japanese soldiers with rifles were searching everywhere for them. He cradled head in hand and closed his eyes, made his fingers march to show that the Japanese had gone away for the night. But then he made his fingers walk again and pointed to himself and the airman. The airman nodded. He pulled his trouser leg down over his wound. He gritted his teeth to show Tien Pao he'd try it. Then he sat listening long. At last he made a motion to Tien Pao and crawled outside. Tien Pao grabbed Glory of the Republic's rope and crawled out behind him. It was the first night that Tien Pao was not alone, but in many ways it was the most horrible night of Tien Pao's long journey. At first, Tien Pao walked slowly ahead of the man to find the easiest path for him. They dragged down the first scrubby, rock-strewn hill and dragged up the next one. The going down was the same slow, painful crawl as the going up. Every step in the uneven, dark path was agony to the wounded man. At times, Tien Pao could hear him grind his teeth. When the path at last widened, Tien Pao began to walk beside the silent airman to give him support. He placed the rope in the man's hand so the Glory of the Republic would help tug him on. They went on again, but at times the man dug his hand so hard into Tien Pao's shoulder that Tien Pao had all he could do to keep from yelping from pain. The night wore on. The hours passed. But it seemed to Tien Pao that if he looked back, he would still be able to see the split rock where they'd spent the day. They stopped again. The airman clutched Tien Pao's shoulder for support. The cold sweat of pain rolled over his face, but he gave Tien Pao a queer, twisted grin and took up the slow journey again. At last it came. The tall man reeled on the path. He turned completely around, took an uneven step as if he were hurrying back, and crashed down over Tien Pao. Tien Pao went down under him. He wriggled frantically to worm himself from under the heavy, motionless man. There the big man lay, sprawled across the path. Tien Pao stood over him, shivering with dread. He did not know what to do. Then, in the awful silence, he heard the murmur of the river below. Grabbing the airman's helmet, Tien Pao plunged down to the river. Glory of the Republic bowled along at his heels. Tien Pao hurried back as fast as he could, fearing every moment he would stumble in the blackness of the rocky hillside and spill the precious water. Suddenly he stood stock still. He imagined he'd heard movements, soft voices on top of the hill. Tien Pao was cold with dread. Had the Japanese stumbled across the helpless airman? Then, on top of the hill, a cuckoo called. Tien Pao's fears eased. The mountain cuckoo had called again. The cuckoo had called. It was a good omen. Tien Pao trotted up the path. Again, a cuckoo called close to Tien Pao. Immediately, another sleepy cuckoo up the mountain answered him. That's strange. It was wonderful. The little mountain was full of cuckoos. Oh, everything had to be all right. Tien Pao reached the path, and the still figure of the American sprawled across it. No Japanese had found him. Feeling brave and hopeful, Tien Pao dashed the helmet full of water into the airman's still face. He dropped to his knees, waiting for the first breath. From behind a tall bush, at the side of the path, stepped a man. Tien Pao heard the soft step. He jumped to his feet, froze there. He'd heard but one soft step, but he and the airman and the little pig were inside a ring of armed men. The airman stirred and moaned, but he did not know what was going on. Who do you think it is? I hope it's not the Japanese. A tall bearded man who must be the leader pointed with his gun to the airman. "Who is he and what are you doing with him?" he asked in Chinese. Tien Pao opened his mouth, but no sound would come. Fear choked his throat. He stood staring down at the helpless figure of the airman. What must he say? Anything he said might be all wrong. It must be best to tell the truth. Tien Pao looked up from the airman to the bearded man, and somehow he found courage and words. And when he began, he talked as he had never talked in his life. He told about the battle he'd seen from the high cliff, and that this was the airman who had killed all the Japanese on the road. He told how he had called him out a warning from the cliff. The men listened silently. At last the leader nodded. "You have spoken the truth. We too know of the great battle of this brave warrior, but we marvel that you found him. We could not find him, nor could we find you." And here's a picture of them. So these are Chinese soldiers. "It is more that he found me," Tien Pao said hastily, and then he looked earnestly up at the man. "Please, my lord," he begged, "please, Sir Bandit, do not kill him, for this warrior airman has greatly helped our people." The man chuckled. The leader stroked his beard in amusement. "Ah, we may look like it, but we are not bandits. We too fight the Japanese. We are the Chinese guerrillas of the mountains. We come out at night to kill and destroy the Japanese, but we shall do well by you and the airman." To Tien Pao's astonishment, the leader made the soft cuckoo call. Down the path, there was an answering sleepy call. Two men came silently through the dark between them. They carried a rough, hurriedly made stretcher. Without a word, they laid the feverish, muttering airman on the stretcher and trotted off down the path. Some of the guerrilla band went with the stretcher carriers as guards, but the airman knew nothing of what was happening to him. After the airman was gone, the leader took Tien Pao on his shoulder. "The pace we set and the shape you're in, we'll do it this way." When Tien Pao looked back, the guerrilla trotted on behind with the glory of the Republic under his arm as if he weighed no more than a chicken. They set off down the night, deeper into the dark mountains, away from the guiding sound of the river. The guerrillas moved swiftly and silently through the black mountains, down beaten paths, but also over many secret trails that must be known only to them. They walked as surely as if it had been daylight. No one spoke a word. Tien Pao still marveled at the sudden happening. "Often I heard the sleepy cuckoo call these many nights, but I didn't know," he whispered down to the guerrilla. The guerrilla chuckled. "We are all in the mountains," he said softly. But then he laid a warning finger on his lips. They were going down a broad, well-worn mountain path. Tien Pao was to talk no more. The guerrilla who was carrying Glory of the Republic had one hand around the little pig's snout. Glory of the Republic was sound asleep. His ears hung limp. Suddenly there was a hushed cuckoo call. The little procession melted from the path and into the shadows of the rocks. In one moment, the trail lay empty, except for the man with Glory of the Republic. Now he set the little pig down in the middle of the path, gave the sleepy pig a sharp, mean jab, and then he was gone from the path too. Glory of the Republic let out a long, loud squeal. Bewildered and alone, the little pig stood on the path. He raised his nose to snuffle for Tien Pao. He grunted a sharp question. Down the steep path, a Japanese soldier came stealing, gun in hand. For a moment, the bayonet on his gun flashed in the dark as he lunged at the unsuspecting little pig. The guerrilla leader clamped a hand over Tien Pao's mouth to keep him still. Tien Pao struggled, but as the leader held him hard, guerrillas slid out of the shadows behind and to either side of the charging Japanese. Suddenly, the Japanese soldier charged no more. A black cloth came down from nowhere over his head. Strong hands pinioned his arms. There was a muffled scream. The gun clattered to the rocky path. It bounced up and landed beside the startled little pig. One muffled, short scream, and then the Japanese had vanished down the mountain between two guerrillas. The remaining guerrillas took up the march again. They were silent, and ahead walked the scouts. Far behind, trailing along, each man by himself, came the rear guard. Thus, they were protected on all sides from any surprise by the Japanese. But the rest of the night, they did not meet another single living thing, nor did the cuckoo call again. Toward morning, the party at last halted. A little mud house loomed up. It clung to the side of a cliff. There was no one in the little house but an old, withered, toothless crone. That means an old woman. As a word from the leader, she silently began cooking rice over a ready fire. Tien Pao looked around the little room crowded with the men. But the airman, where is he? He demanded wildly. Where is the American? No one answered. Only the old crone looked at him. The guerrillas were gathered close, whispering. Tien Pao was bewildered. But where then is the Japanese soldier? He asked in confusion. Did you kill him? Okay, we're going to stop here. And we will wait until the next reading to find out what happened to the airman. So the cuckoo calling was really the guerrillas. Those are the warriors in the mountains who are not a part of an organized army. They are often volunteers who fight against an enemy, which in this case is the Japanese. So we'll find out the next time what happened to the airman, I hope. Bye-bye.